Good afternoon, guys. Dr. Ken Nordberg back again. You know, isn't this something for somebody to talk about deer hunting year-round, day after day, never saying the same thing twice. Well, sometimes twice, but it gives you an idea how much there is to know about whitetails and whitetail hunting. So I want to thank you guys too for watching. I want to thank you. We're hitting some big milestones here. We're up over 2.5 million hours or minutes, I guess it is, of watch time, and that's a big one. But there's bigger ones. so keep watching, guys. I appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube account. I really appreciate you. I'd like to hit some more big levels up ahead here, which will do me some good, and you too. Thank you. Well, this is a little different today. You know, last time we talked about what to look for when you're trying to find a stand site for hunting big bucks. Say, you might notice my voice is not as good today. It's been that way for a while. I'm a little worried. I think I'm going to need some more surgery on my vocal cords. We'll see. But at any rate, this is different today. We're not talking about what to look for stand sites. That's, of course, very important. That's something a buck hunter needs to know. So if you haven't seen that YouTube presentation is, be sure to go back, because that's really, really important. And so is this. And what's interesting about today's talk is everything I'm going to tell you about was taught to us by gray wolves. The gray wolves who den and live in my whitetail study area. They've been with us for a long time. But we couldn't hunt bucks the way we do and do as well as we do if it hadn't been for what those gray wolves taught us. So keep that in mind. So you're going to learn how to hunt like a wolf. When wolves are searching for vulnerable prey, they follow certain trails that weave around through all the whitetail home ranges within their vast hunting territory, which is commonly around 100 square miles in size. And those trails regularly pass close to whitetail feeding areas, because that's an easy place to see a deer or to find deer. You know, they go back to those feeding areas over and over again unless they're alarmed there by wolves or hunters like us. And so they're reliable places to find deer. Now, they don't have to see the deer to know whether or not they're vulnerable. They can tell they're vulnerable just by their different odors, their airborne odors, and their trail sense. They can sniff the track of a deer and know if it's a fawn. They can catch that fawn. They can know if that big buck is wounded or has got arthritis or he's got liver flukes or tapeworms or whatever might be slowing him down in his old age. And they'll know, now here's one we can get. Those big trophy bucks all end up that way. It can be other deer that are wounded or have been hurt. They might have stepped in a hole and broke a leg, things like that. And they can smell that. And that's the deer they're going to key on. And there's lots of different ways they do that. I won't go into that here. But they follow these trails all through their hunting area. And the packs fall single file, and usually the youngsters are at the tail end, scampering around. But when they find one, they usually don't stop there. They just keep going right on past. And they do it in a way that makes the deer, which might be within sight, think they aren't interested in me. They're just going, maybe they're going way across the road and south. They're heading that direction. Nothing to worry about. I'll just keep eating here. And the way they do that is by walking straight along that trail, it's predictable. Uh, they aren't the kind of animal that go this way and that way and that way unless they're actually closing in on a deer. They're going straight along the trail. They're showing no interest in deer by keeping their heads pointed straight ahead. They're looking that way. Their nose is busy though. The nose is giving them all the information they need. Their noses are 10,000 times more sensitive than the human noses. They gain a lot of information from just the scents that trails leave behind them, or scents that are carried to them by the air from upwind. But anyway, us hunters, we got to use our eyes. Our ears are only good for special circumstances. A lot of times, a lot of hunters don't even know a deer is near until you start bounding away and brush is cracking and hoof prints are loud, or hoof beats are loud, and oh, there's a deer. So, but we have to depend on our eyes, and we can do it. We can use the same technique as the wolves by following certain trails in the woods, looking for special signs like deer tracks and droppings and ground scrapes and even antler rubs. And we don't hunt antler rubs much in a Nordberg camp, but they sure do influence where we're going to hunt deer a lot of times, because we know this is a pretty special place to a buck. But anyway, so we're looking for signs, and we do it the same way the wolves do it. We don't want those deer being alarmed and running away from the area, because when we find certain signs that tell us, hey, this is where I want to be later today or tomorrow morning, we don't want those deer alarmed and long gone by the time we get back to hunt those spots. We want those deer to be here today or tomorrow morning, so we don't want to alarm them. And so we do it like wolves. We walk on special trails, keeping our heads pointed straight ahead. We walk non-stop. We don't stop. We don't stop to measure tracks. Us Nordbergs have been doing this so many years that we can generally look at a track and say, boy, that's a track made by a big buck, or that's a 2.5-year-old buck, or that's a doe, that's a yearling doe, that's a fawn. That's a 3.5-year-old probably, and that one there is probably 4.5, 5.5, or 6.5, a buck in its prime. Boy, that's the kind of buck we want to get, just by looking at the tracks. Now, when we leave our tree stands or ground level stands in the morning, we leave at about 11 o'clock in the morning. We're done there, unless a midday feeding cycle is expected. I talked to you about that last time. But anyway, normally we get down for our tree stands, and from the stand site on, all of our stand site approach trails connect to a big oval shaped trail, as they're all connecting deer trails. To begin with, we adopt them for our own purposes, but only those trails. That oval one we call a cruise trail, like we call wolf trails, cruise trails. That's our cruise trail, and all our stand site approach trails connect to cruise trail. So we've got all kinds. Some of those cruise trails are really long. They go up to a mile one way and then back around, or that way, maybe 2 miles long. Most of them are at least a half mile in a circuit. And in that place there, hunting the way we do, that keeps deer from abandoning their ranges, especially the big bucks, which are really sensitive about that. We're going to see tracks all through that area. We never fail to see fresh tracks of deer using portions of our trail or crossing the trail. Big bucks, sometimes, once in a while, they'll share that trail with us. We'll find their big tracks and or droppings on the trail, and but most of the time they don't like that trail, because as the season goes on, beginning on day 3 or 4 when we start doing this, our trail scents are growing each day on that trail. They're becoming more and more intense. Now, which is an important thing, you know, if you just, those are the only trails we use during the hunting season. Before the hunting season, we're scouting, we go everywhere. We want to see everything. We want to find every possible buck stand site. But we only prepare about 4 to 6 of them before the hunting season. And we always do that by at least 2 weeks before the hunting season begins. Because big bucks, when they abandon a range, they might not be back for a couple of weeks. And so we want to be done in time so that we know they're back doing predictable things at predictable places during predictable hours, opening weekend. So anyway, and at places that we had selected before the season began, those stand sites, those 4 to 6 per hunter that we selected. So that's important to be done 2 weeks early. Now, anyway, when we're scouting like that, it's like still hunting, going every which way. We're going to alarm deer. Now, during the hunting season, you can't do that. You shouldn't even be a still hunter. If you're a stand hunter, don't let, if you can, I mean, don't anybody in your group decide, I'm going to do some still hunting today. Well, if they do that, say, go somewhere else. Don't do it where we're stand hunting. Because they're going to chase deer out in a single day. One still hunter can run all the deer out of a square mile, easily. You don't want that. So, no still hunting. No wandering everywhere during the deer hunting season where we're stand hunting. And so you got it. One of the prerequisites of doing a good job of scouting during the deer season is to stick to the fewest trails possible. And so the only trails we're going to walk on after hunting begins is those stand site approach trails connected to our big oval cruise trail. That's all. Nowhere else. We're not going to go anywhere else. And we never have need to. We always find fresh tracks of mature bucks on that cruise trail, or even our stand site approach trails when we start back. And we're looking for it. We might only go 4, 5, 6 blocks, and we've already found, holy cow, there's a buck cross trail here. It was going over that way. Now, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but what we're looking for is fresh tracks and or droppings, or maybe a fresh ground scrape, just renewed ground scrape made by a big buck when we're cruising. And we don't stop. We don't stop to measure tracks. We look down there, gee, there's some droppings there about 7/8 to an inch long and shiny, clumped. Oh, there's a big buck stopped here, right here on our trail. Or there's these big tracks going across, and went over that way. Well, now this is possibly the next spot, or near the next spot where you're going to hunt next. You're not going to hunt right here. You know, you can see buck tracks in the snow going one way or another. Well, how do you know the deer is going to be here when you come back and hunt here? You don't, unless there's a very good reason for those tracks being there. Where that buck went, if you went over there, there's a good reason for him going over there. Yeah, so these are, but what you're looking for is just fresh signs. So by the time sometimes we'll go maybe a half mile on one of our cruise trails. Oh, found enough. There's been a big buck here. He's with a doe. Here's some 3-inch tracks with it. Or here's one. This buck has been dragging his hoofs from track to track in snow, meaning he's under the influence of doe and estrus pheromone. Boy, that's an important finding. Or maybe it's, so anyway, or there's a feeding area there, this kind of thing. But we're looking for fresh tracks along that trail, or droppings. So, and we're walking non-stop. Don't stop for anything. Just keep walking, don't stop. And don't be looking around. You aren't going to see those deer. They're going to be either hidden by cover, or they're going to be standing frozen and watching you as you go by. If they're really fresh, he's probably close. And if he sees you stop and you're really interested in those tracks there, like you're measuring them and you're looking over there, that's all that buck needs to know to say, I'm getting out of here. You just ruined your chance to take a big buck near these very fresh signs that you just found. So, straight ahead, just keep going. Now, unlike when hunting, like when you're going to your stand sign, when you're searching for deer signs midday, and you won't bother a lot of deer because normally midday, unless there's a midday feeding cycle, they're bedded somewhere. They're in deep cover, hard to see, not moving, not much chance. You might walk close to some and they're watching you go by. But always believe when you're doing this, there's deer watching you. And what you do will determine whether or not your next stand site or next two stand sites are going to be productive or not. So, anyway, you keep going. It doesn't matter now when you're doing this what direction you're going. You can be going downwind, crosswind, upwind. It doesn't matter if deer ahead smell you or deer downwind you smell you. It doesn't matter. Because when they're smelling you and listening to you and watching you, they are determining what you're doing. They're determining you're just moving nonstop like those wolves going by, and you're not at all interested in hunting because you're not stopping to look around. You're not interested in their trail sense, things like that. You're harmless when you're doing that. You can walk within 25 yards of dead deer and not see them, but you won't bother them a bit as long as you keep doing this. So you're going downwind, that's fine. Or you're every once in a while you're stepping on branches that crack loudly underfoot. That doesn't matter either. Doesn't matter a bit. In fact, it's almost good because it gives deer ahead to move a chance to move aside without hurry. Deer far enough ahead to do that without having to rush, without bound or trot quickly away. They can just walk slowly away, unalarmed. They're not particularly alarmed. Get over there about 25 to 50 yards and watch you. And they might be behind all kinds of things, but little spots of the cover. They'll see you going by. They'll be watching everything you do. So, anyway, so there you go by. Oh boy, here's a spot. I kind of like that. I'm going to think about this when I get back to camp. And you go further, and there's another. Oh, this is great. Look, oh, this spot I've got to come to because there's a feeding area right over here. These deer are using that feeding area. Now, they're going to be there this evening, or if it's later in the day. You're heading back to camp, gets so dark after you splash. Oh man, look at these fresh tracks. And they're going to that feeding area. That's where I want to be in the morning. That's kind of thinking you got to be making. But even in the dark, straight to it. Just like going to your stand site. Anytime you're at a stand site, you do these things. But in that case, you walk softly and make use of good cover so they can't identify you when you get close to your stand site. Okay? So now you're walking without concern about sounds or wind direction, but looking straight ahead. Anyway, that's how we do our mid-hunt scouting. And we start that on, we stick to stand sites that we discover, that we found before the hunting season for opening weekend, and sometimes 3 days. And usually we only use one stand site once, and sometimes twice, sometimes twice in a row, and sometimes we'll go there once and come back 5 days later and get a buck there 5 days later, for the reasons we decided it was going to be good in the first place. Sometimes going back 5 days later is a good thing. My son John does that, and he gets them. Anyway, but now, we got back to camp. We got this information in our mind, and now we're having lunch and we're talking. Everybody's got their own stories about what they saw that day and what they found while walking their cruise trails and stand site approach trail connecting. And so they're all excited about that, and they're thinking about that, and gee, the wind, you get out there in front of your tent, hold a wet finger up, and this side gets cool, the wind's from that direction. You look at your compass, okay, that's northwest, okay, that's good to know. All right, now this first spot I found where I'd like to hunt, where a big buck was, just probably maybe minutes or at least very few hours before I came along on my cruise trail, or maybe even on my stand side approach trail. This big buck, why is he there? And you think about that. Now, let's say you just came from a feeding area, and maybe it's a big long one, big long clear cutter or farm field. And so you came out and gee, here's this big buck and he's heading back over that way. And while you were there, you didn't see him. He was over on this side. So he's probably further down on that feeding area. That's where he's feeding. So you're thinking, well, so what I need to do here is get to the edge of the feeding area on the downwind or crosswind side, further in that direction where I was this morning. And we always have aerial photographs with maps, aerial photograph maps laying on our table in deer camp. And my son John has superimposed our trails and stand sites on that map. So here's our cruise trail. And yeah, right about there is where I found that where that buck crossed. Right over here is that feeding area. It's a kind of long, narrow piece here, and it widens over here, widens over here. But bucks like narrow feeding areas. So I think the best bet is be more toward that end over there of the narrow part where it just starts to widen out. So what I had to do then is when I leave camp, I got to walk on this logging trail, and I'm going to get right over here, over down about here, and then go northeast. Now, you see the wind's coming from the northwest, we just figure that out. So I'll be working crosswind to get there, see? So I'm sitting here, and this thing goes this way. It goes in a direction, so when I'm sitting crosswind, my scent's going to be spreading out down this way, and it won't go out into this feeding area. And so that part's safe, so I can sit here. So now you got to figure out, okay, I got to go down about here. Look at the map. Oh yeah, that's maybe 100 feet short of where I went up this morning. So yeah, if I go up the hill, I can get down to this logging trail, old logging trail. Right there, it goes this direction. Then I can veer off to the right. That's how I'm going to go there. So that's where I'm going to hunt this afternoon. Or you might say, well, let's say it's late in the day and you're coming out, it's getting dark in the camp, and here's tracks going across your trail that you used to go out there in the morning of a buck with a doe. Here's 4-inch tracks or 3-inch tracks. That's a big buck, big dominant breeding buck with a doe, and they're heading this way, and there's that crescent-shaped feeding area around the end of a spruce bark right up here, and it's full of red osier. That's where they went to feed this evening. So tomorrow morning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, we're supposed to get a south wind in the morning, I understand, so what I got to do is go back this way. Those deer, they haven't been alarmed. I didn't alarm. It's dark. That thing is way over a hill here. They can't see me. I'm far enough away they can't hear me. I'm not making any distinct sounds coming out. So they're going to be there in the morning. There's no reason why they won't be. And if that doe's in heat in the morning, that buck is going to be with that doe. So what I'm going to do in the morning, I'm going to go past the side of south wind, and there's a deer trail going up a hill down a ways here. I mean, it's a lot of timber there. I get around the other side there, and then I'm going to come back from the downwind side, staying in timber, and about 100 yards south of that feeding area. I'm going to sit down next to a major deer trail that goes north and south from that that feeding area. They can't smell me there. And the way whitetails kind of feed, they'll always start at the downwind side of a feeding area and work their way. And if it's, they'll work their way the length. In this case, they'll start at the south end of that feeding area and work their way north. And they won't smell me because I'm downwind. And so, when they leave, they usually leave into the wind, when they do that, let's see, how's this working? They'll be going downwind for a little ways, and wherever they go, they like to go into the wind, but wherever they get there, when they get there, they got to go downwind again for a ways to get to their bedding areas. So as long as they have nothing to fear in there, they'll do that, but they'll do it cautiously. So that's where I'm going to hunt in the morning. That's a great idea. Now, when you're going along a trail here, what you're looking for is fresh signs, really fresh signs, and stand signs. But they're based on something real, not on a guess. It's places where deer have a good reason of being there. You can come walking and say, this looks like a good spot. Well, I can see way over there. I'm going to sit here because of that. Well, that's a guess, and it's not a very good guess at that, because big bucks aren't going to be out in open areas like that during daylight hours during the hunting season, especially after opening weekend, when all mature whitetails in the area you hunt realize they're being hunted by you and your buddies. They're going to be really cautious from that time on. That's when hunting becomes different. That's why we change stand sites as often as we do. We always figure, and I said it last time, if you're sitting in one place a half a day within easy shooting distance of very fresh tracks and or droppings a big buck, and you don't see the buck, he knows you're there. And it's right probably 95% of the time. So we don't mess around hunting where we know we have poor odds for taking a buck. We want good odds every time. We went in a place a buck has never found us before. He has no reason to be cautious about this place. There's never been a hunter here ever in my lifetime, the buck thing. Nothing to worry about. And if you're really good about using cover, that's what you want to do. Okay, now you're back in camp. Now, you got an idea how this works. You found those signs, but you're going to hunt the deer where they are. They have to have good reasons for being where they are, the places that you decide, for the places you decide to hunt. Now, so during the hunting season, usually beginning day 4, we do this every day, unless there's a midday feeding cycle. Sometimes that means we'll have to go back to one that thought, gee, I didn't see one there, but boy, that was a good spot. I think I'll try it again today. Something like that. But when a lot of time, here we got here, and now the next question is back in camp. How do I get there without that deer knowing it? Well, if you go out in the afternoon, get there early while they're still bedded. And you can make noise, minimal noise, and go through uncharted areas or places where there's no deer trails. And in the morning, when it's dark, you got to have deer trails. So one of the things you got to be thinking about is, well, tomorrow morning, I talked about going up this way, using a deer trail to get there, that kind of thing. Well, you want deer trails because of all the places in the woods to walk, deer trails are relatively quiet. The trails that we select before hunting season or that begins, we clean up. Not the big oval cruise trail, we don't clean that up. Don't worry about that. But all of our stand site approach trails that we use during opening weekend and maybe even the third day, we want those trails to be relatively clean. So when scouting me first, and we spend time, lots of time, cleaning those trails, throwing all the brush, loose branches laying on the trail, so it's relatively quiet. So when you go out there in the morning, you want to climb trails, so you got to be thinking, well, is there a deer trail here I can use? Well, that's part of what a lot of experience in your hunting area gives you, and a lot of good scouting. Because when we scout, we were thinking, well, you know, there's buck sign here, and look at these big droppings here. Damn, I've never been here before. This might be a spot I want to hunt this winter, this hunting season. If I see any big buck tracks heading in this direction, I want to be here. It might be a small area where big buck has been run off by the big dominant buck, but he's still a big buck. He's just not quite big enough. And that might be a good place to hunt. I've taken some good bucks in places like that. And he doesn't move from that small area very much while breeding is in progress. And but there'll be trails in there, not many, maybe only one or two crossing, where there's a lot of big tracks of a big buck in the trail. He's been using this a lot. There's big ones that are fresh and big ones that are old. They aren't so fresh, they're kind of dull looking. And fresh and old droppings, fresh droppings being shiny and old ones being dull. And they're clumped. And it looks like, you look at those tracks, and these are the only deer using these trails. And maybe there's a ground scrape nearby, and antler rubs. You know, there's a bunch of antler rubs. This buck has been spending a lot of time here rubbing on trees. Those bucks that get run off do that. A lot of them do that. They can make a lot of ground scrapes and antler rubs around the few trails where they stay during the time breeding is going on. So, well, look at all the buck ground scrape. And look at here, geez, these are 3-4 inches in diameter. That's a good sized buck. So, that's a place you want to. So, when we're scouting, we're looking for stuff like that. And if we don't decide to hunt them opening weekend, we got them in our mind. We think, gee, I remember being there was a little knoll right here and a big tree laying down on top of it. And I could come up from that low area behind it all the way up to the timber, up to that down tree without deer seeing me. And when the wind's from the west, northwest to southwest, any of those directions, boy, that's the place to be. And then when you're out there on your cruise trips, oh, look at this, 2 bucks. Here, one went over there, another one over there. They were walking, they weren't alarmed, and they're going in that direction. I'd be pretty excited about going up that hillside to that down tree and sitting down behind that morning or evening. But morning I want a trail to get there. So there's got to be a deer trail. If you think about that spot, there was a deer trail coming up that hill. And I'll get on that. When I get to that downwind side, I'll be looking for that, and I'll go up that trail, just as quiet as I can be. Get up behind that tree. So that's how we do it. I mean, it's simple, but it takes some skill. And you got to know your deer signs. And when you're scouting, pre-season, it's a good idea to do a lot of measuring of tracks and droppings. Don't handle the droppings. The only reason I say that is because of chronic wasting disease. You can get the prions from chronic wasting disease just by handling droppings. So you see them, measure them. When you're out scouting pre-season, you don't do this during the hunting season, but pre-season, see that's 3/4. These droppings, here's a puddle, almost all of them are 1/2 inch. There's a few a little longer, a few a little short, but the majority are 1/2 inch. Droppings that size are made by only 2 deer. A mature doe, any age, mature doe. Sometimes they'll be just a tish longer, but most of them will be 1/2 inch. But it could also be made by a yearling buck. Now, early in the season, their droppings might not be clumped yet, the buck droppings. Doe droppings are never clumped. Buck droppings, if they're clumped and they're 1/2 inch, absolutely, that's a yearling buck that made those droppings. But you have to measure little individual droppings in the clump to come up with that information. So, anyway, what you're looking for when you're scouting during hunting season is places where deer have a good reason of being there. Not places where, well, you just walk through this, or the tracks went all the way from over there, way over to there. Big bucks hardly ever use the same trail twice in a row, and they walk off trail more than half of the time during the hunting season. Keep that in mind. When you're scouting midday, you're looking for two things. Very fresh tracks of a big buck, a mature buck. Well, that means 2.5-year-old to 6.5-year-old bucks, but they can run anywhere from 3 3/8 inch for a 2.5-year-old, up to 4 inches for a dominant breeding buck, a really big trophy buck. You're looking for those, and or their droppings, which will run from, it'd be 5/8 inch for a 2.5-year-old buck, all the way up to inch, and sometimes 1.25 inches even for a dominant breeding buck. Great big ones. So you were looking for fresh signs, just made recently, freshly made ground scrape. The other thing you're looking for is 2 stand sights. Now, when you're cruising, you aren't going to probably see an stand sight. It might be that you'll be walking along and say, holy cow, there's a freshly renewed ground scrape right there. Oh, that comes first. Now, you don't see many of those in November, but when you do, those are dynamite spots to be watching as a stand hunter. So that's number one. So in this case, you're looking as you're walking, oh gosh, there's a bunch of this really thick cover over there. Lots of young evergreens. Boy, that's where I'm going to sit, and that's downwind. So you just keep going. So in this case, you saw the place where you're going to sit. Or maybe when you were scouting earlier and you were walking along this same trail, right on the trail, and you thought, boy, this is a nice area here, and gee, there's a really old ground scrape. You can hardly tell it's a ground scrape, but the branches overhanging are kind of busted up from previous year. And this might be good, is, oh, if they came back and renewed this again this year, well, that'd be a good place to sit over in there. That one, I could come from the north to get that one, or from the west. If I come from the west, I want to parallel this trail. I don't want to walk on it. It'd be better to come from the north and get into that heavy cover that way. That way, any deer walking out of this trail won't smell any of my trails and have no idea any human is near. So I got to keep that in mind. So you walk along, you're cruising, and oh, geez, there it is. It's been renewed. I'm going to back off here right now. I'm going to go around, get on that trail going out of here, because I don't want any more trail scent on this trail. You know, the ground scrapes up there, dirt all over the snow, and or moss and leaves. So no, I'm going to back off here and go way around. And so anyway, you might see one when you're cruising, but most time you won't. All you're going to see is where that deer went, or you think the deer went. You might, let's say there's no snow on the ground, and it's a little soft dirt here in the trail, and the buck's track is pointed that way. And you might see over here, there's 3-inch track, or maybe a 3/8 inch track of a yearling doe, a little smaller than the yearling doe's breed too. But you see them, they went that way. That's where the tracks were pointed. Well, and there's a feeding area with them. Or maybe a doe bedding area. During November, doe bedding areas can be a really great place to hunt as well. Anyway, you get back to camp, you check your map, and yeah, boy, there's that feeding area. Or here's that mixed area with a lot of dead grass in it, and those does love to lay in deep grass. So that's probably the bedding area right over there. I'm going to watch that midday, because those deer, that buck will be with that doe in that bedding area from about 10 o'clock until about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's where most of the breeding goes. So every now and then they're going to be moving around in there. And that's where I want to be. So there you are now. The 2 things you're looking for is fresh signs, really fresh signs, not old signs, fresh signs, and stand signs. You might not see the stand signs. You might not be able to figure that out until you get back to camp or thinking about it a little bit. So if you've done some good scouting you know your country well, you got some good uh, aerial photographs of your hunting area, that makes it a lot easier. You can figure these things out, checking the wind direction and a lot of other things before you go. So there you are. That's how we do it. That's what you need to know about mid-hunt scouting or cruising. That's how we continue to key on big bucks. We are always sitting near big bucks, almost always, unless that doe is no longer an estrus and that buck's long gone when we come back. But most of the time, we're always sitting very near big bucks, whether we see them or not. Every half day we hunt. So there you go, guys. Well, thanks for watching. And thanks again for buying my books, my 10th edition. You're going to be glad you have it. That's going to be your reference book the rest of your life. And make sure you're doing things right, taking all the necessary precautions. Without that, you're wasting your time. You just can't be regularly successful at taking big bucks unless you know where to hunt every day, every half day, and you take all the necessary precautions to avoid tipping off that buck that you're nearby. One thing one thing to remember, how long did I spend here telling you about this? I can't, with the time that I have to do this kind of thing, to teach in person on video, I can't possibly cover everything you need to know. I'm telling you the main things. But there's little things that can change things. And to learn everything you need to know about anything I've taught you thus far, including mid-hunt cruising, you need to have my book. You need to have that, go through that thing. It's something you probably want to look at every year before you start scouting and before you start hunting. So, and you won't find that in any other book available today. Okay. Okay, thanks, Carl. Thanks a lot, guys. See you soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries. And be sure to sign up for my email updates. Here you will also find deer and bear hunting articles, my website bookstore, and much more.